Hi, I'm Sanjay Mukherjee. I'm an architect and a humanitarian shelter consultant. I represented CARE in the emergency shelter cluster during the 2007 Cyclone Cedar response in Bangladesh. I'll share some of my experiences working with emergency shelter cluster here. The Cyclone Cedar 2007 was the strongest to hit the country of Bangladesh since the super cyclone of 1991. Though the death toll were comparatively low, but the damage to houses, crops and livelihood were extensive. There were around 1 million families affected, half a million families had become homeless, and preliminary report indicated that around 300,000 families are unable to build back by themselves and recover to the basics and would certainly require some kind of external shelter assistance. The winter was cold and moist. The people were living in makeshift shelters made out of salvaged material. The life of women and children were very difficult. The IFRC-led shelter cluster was being tested in the field operations of Bangladesh for the first time, with the support from government and the UN bodies. They called it the Shelter Coordination Group. Initially, the group had 3 facilitators, 2 program coordinators and 1 information manager. They carried out a rapid assessment and organized the initial setup. The group created a website where informations on who, what, where, the gaps and the donors and the actors were shared, updated with all the cluster members. Soon after the initial rollout, the group formed a technical working group focusing on the technical issues like the design, the material and the cost of the shelters with the member agencies, and also the group felt to extend its programs at field level, and they called in a field coordinator. The field coordinator was moving in the field from one place to another affected area, collecting information on the gaps and the needs of shelter. Also the field coordinator played a very important role in coordinating with the local agencies and getting information at field level and in managing the information flow from national to the field level. The group had a very clear vision to make a common understanding between the actors and like the practitioners about the design, the process and the best practices. Although the team members, like, they had different roles and responsibilities, but they had a common objective to make the effort more effective and efficient for all. The team played a very flexible role from time to time in order to achieve those objectives. The cluster had a very proactive and a cumulative approach. The information on the impact and the need to mitigate the aftermath was collected through a series of mapping exercise and baseline surveys with the field officers and the reporting agencies. The group then formed a small group of experienced and sound people who were constantly working on developing the shelter strategic framework, reviewing it from time to time with the cluster members and updating it. In spite of the proactive measures to gather information, the exact figures remain elusive. The international assistance remained below than what was required. Funding was a major issue then, since there were very limited agencies participating in the construction activity, and the gap was huge. The cluster did a lot of news flashes from time to time, projecting like the current emergency situations to the international community and trying to pull in funds. The group also worked to make the exact data available to the donors. Simultaneously, the TUG was working with the Bangladesh Disaster Management Committee and the operating agencies to try out different shelter options and produce a document top proposals of the most feasible designs. Initially, the operation was planned only for the emergency period, but in case of Bangladesh, the emergency appeared to be continuing. So the program stretched beyond the expected time frame. The group conducted a series of workshops on technical issues with the operating agencies and the UN at the field level. Also produced IC's materials for the practitioners on building back better. By the end of it, the shelter members and the operating agencies had adequate information on shelter program recommendations and best practices and were ready to commence work at the field level. The only challenge still was the funds and commitments. We were falling short in both funds and commitments. The emergency phase was getting over and the shelter cluster had to wind up from there. So we planned a smooth handover of responsibilities from the IFRC-led shelter cluster to the UNDP. The UNDP had a very strong presence in the country and were involved in the emergency shelter cluster activities from the beginning of the operation itself. At the end of my experience as a facilitator in the shelter cluster, I would like to share my learnings as it is important that we as facilitators play a neutral role in understanding the needs and priorities of donors, agencies and the affected people. A prior understanding of national policies and background is always useful, and the most important thing is the emergency shelter cluster or the emergency cluster is planned only for the emergency phase. So when we plan